Welcome to the Indigenous Health Learning Lodge's SNIPE lecture series, sharing notable Indigenous pedagogy and education. We chose the snipe as our symbol because it is a bird that inhabits the space between the water and the land, just like the Learning Lodge inhabits the space between Western knowledge and traditional ways of knowing and being. We hope that this lecture will help you to consider the impact Indigenous knowledge and ways of being can have to help all people create brighter futures. This lecture is by Dr. Dawn Martin Hill. Her work has always focused on health and well-being as tied to culture, the natural world, and Indigenous ways of knowing. Learn more about her in the video description.
At Six Nations, I have 4 kids, 41 to 25. I was tracked 9 grandchildren, and I'm looking forward to retiring September 2024. But before I do that, I'm trying really hard to get McMaster to shift its thinking around what Indigenous knowledge is and what they should be supporting in terms of community-led research. Let's hope this works. Not this one. All right, here we go. So this is Christy Belford's beautiful artwork. People don't have a really solid understanding of what traditional ecological knowledge is. I'm actually not a fan of the way it was developed and why it was developed, but it is what the West recognizes, so I use it. It's really 2 systems, 2 ways of doing things brought together, which I think CIHR thought they discovered some in the 2 I've seen. And I just wanted to like faint because I've been pushing Indigenous knowledge at CIHR for like 15 years. The difference with Indigenous knowledge is it centers Indigenous knowledge. Traditional ecological knowledge works with both systems, health, science, Indigenous elders, land-based knowledge. So they're a little different in that Indigenous knowledge doesn't shy away from Western, but they really don't worry about explaining Western knowledge to their research projects. It's just a really political difference, I guess you would say. But it includes everything from law to mental health, substance abuse, ethnobotany, and of recent, climate change. So Indigenous communities in Canada, as you probably are all aware, have been experiencing a lot of health crisis. The gap is growing, it's not getting smaller. Even though the money's growing and the research is growing, there seems to be a mismatch or dissymmetry between why is the health not improving. And when we started the research project, I started by asking the community and the local experts before I design, before I implement. And they said, well, nobody's ever asked us things like, do you have access to clean water? Even though, including McMaster, but U of T, Western, Waterloo, they've all done huge research projects with Six Nations Health Services specific, but not one question on whether or not the people there that they were doing evaluations and assessments or surveys on had access to clean water or attended residential school. So these are the types of gaps that we feel need to be addressed through Indigenous ways of knowing and knowledge. And what that really means is sort of pluralism. Doesn't matter whether it's Western knowledge or if it's Cree, Ojibwe, Haudenosaunee. We don't try to tell people what to believe or think or what assumptions they have. It's a pluralistic approach to knowledge. So if I go to the Amazon, which I have been to study with them, but the project I wrote was saying I was bringing them educational pathways, so very Western, egocentric, most grants are. When we were really going there, asked them questions about how were the priorities that they laid out for planning their communities thought about through an Indigenous lens. And we actually acted on everything they told us, including birthing. And so the idea that people in the Amazon could teach me and other academics that I was with what we should focus on, and what they said was rites of passage puberty and the birthing process. So some of these things we've integrated in our work, and obviously in the water work that became very natural. The problem that the West has with Indigenous knowledge, the ways of knowing, is that there is enough spiritual, acknowledge and work with, we don't shy away from. And because of the history of the West and Enlightenment and persecution of thinkers, they have different issues, but those aren't our issues on Turtle Island. They're European issues. Our issues are not trying to prove or disprove whether the great law of the Haudenosaunee was actually founded by somebody who was a divine being. That's not the debate. The debate is what were his intentions in bringing peace to our people. So it's just a different question that you ask through these different metaphorical processes. And I know I'm not going to read all of this, I'm just trying to leave it there for people who might want to try to get a grasp on it. So it took me 30 years, so don't worry if this is going to confuse you a bit. So land is the core. In other words, our knowledge comes from our geographic region. When I'm with the Cree, they know everything there is to know about the moose. I mean, they are moose masters. This is their only animal they really care about, beaver and moose. And they could tell you literally everything. And when I went hunting with them, it was like watching poetry, their relationship with those animals and the way that they took care of the animal, the way that they ceremonied and sang and related to the animal, and the same with the Sioux and the buffalo. So the Sioux don't know about growing corn in the desert the way the Hopi do. You understand? Our knowledge comes from our landscape. In fact, Mohawk means people of the Flint. Almost all of our original names are based on our location on land. So we have expertise, but we also recognize we don't have expertise in everything. If I'm with the Hopi and there was a lot of tarantulas around the camp, it freaked me out a little bit. And they were like, oh, we have all the medicine, don't worry about that. Well, when I come home, do we have tarantula medicine? And they're like, no, why would we? So it's very regional. And that knowledge doesn't mean it stays within some kind of cultural island. We traveled far and wide distances. One of the things about Indigenous ways of knowing, especially when it comes to science and health in particular, is that we understand we're just a living organism like everything else. Everything on the planet deserves to be there, not just human beings. But we depend on all of these plant life, tree life, animal life, aquatic life. They do not depend on us. That's the fundamental difference, unless you are Indigenous. So science is beginning to find out some really interesting things in the last decade. One is that Indigenous people are keystone species. What is a keystone species? It means that you are required to be there to have that ecosystem thrive. So the idea that we were just passive observers roaming around looking for buffalo, going, oh gee, I hope I run into one, which is the way we've been presented as nomadic, kind of wandering the land. That's a very mindless, stereotypical, racist understanding of Indigenous people. We managed our land. The rainforest didn't just happen. It just like, it wasn't an organic thing. When I'm in the Amazon, what are the women doing? They're out there planting. They're creating food. So as Salish were planting kelp to make sure that they had plenty of fish. So they were feeding the aquatic life so they could have food security. In the Amazon, they're planting trees with different berries and nuts so that they have food security. But so do all the other animals that they rely on. So we were managing that land. The Sioux did burns, and the buffalo followed that fire. They followed that fire because that is where the food that they most like would then grow. And therefore they were really following the Sioux, not the other way around. So understanding what a keystone species is and being able to look at how we shaped the plentiful food that Europeans were so stunned when they got here, because everywhere they looked, whether they were in the plains or whether they're on the coast or whether they're in the woodlands, there was an abundance of food. there was an abundance of thriving ecosystems. And ourselves, according to every literature, archaeological set of literature that I read, we had very few diseases. Main disease that we didn't carry was arthritis. I can attest to that. In fact, our people get arthritis at very young ages, which doctors always misdiagnose. That's a whole other discussion. So we have certain ailments, but none of them were catastrophic. We didn't have things like epidemics. According to all the bones, and they've taken a lot of our bones and studied them, they know that we did not have these diseases that were brought to us by European people. So archaeologists are beginning to realize, people like the Shawnee and many others were managing their land. They were growing those chestnut trees, and the chestnut trees would then attract the animals. So we were actively shaping the food forest that you would then think was natural and untouched and pristine. But that's a mess, right? It's beginning to fall apart. And that way, sustainability is our way of life. It's, I refer to the Thanksgiving address, which our kids have to learn in our schools by the grade 8. They have to know the long version. They don't graduate unless they can say it in the language. They say it every morning, and they say it before they leave. They say it on our radio station at 6 o'clock. If you want to hear it, tune in. We say it here in our meetings, in our gatherings. We say it in Longhouse. And that's such an important understanding of who we are as a worldview, as a paradigm, that as a pedagogy, these are our values. This is the paradigm we operate from. We think the natural world, not a religion, not even a clan, not our identity, our race. It is about thanking the earth, and our children are shaped to always continue to understand that they should give thanks to everything every day. I think we live in a really different world, and more schools adopt that. But that I'm Iroquois centric. So this is our team, not everybody, but this is our traditional ecological knowledge team. Some McMaster students, graduate students, undergrad, elders, chiefs, who have been forming and shaping the entire research project from day one. And they always talk about food and how our traditional foods were superior to anything the West has provided or brought to us. So what I always tell my friends is we were gluten-free, sugar-free, dairy-free, and now only rich people can afford that diet. Where our diets were superior. We were very healthy. We had abundance of water, and most of the game we ate, and that's just a small portion of it, you see had very little fat. But one of the things the elders told me, the Lubicon elder in Northern Alberta, when I asked him about, how he felt about not having access to moose because of the oil development, it was really crippling in every way to the people there. They said, well, when you start eating food like pig or cow, you start acting like a pig or cow. So it's a deep-seated belief. When I went to Sioux people and I talked to them about it, their food and the kind they ate, and how they felt about Western food, and they said the exact same thing. If you want to understand how we should behave as human beings, go study a buffalo. Just watch it. Watch how it tends to its herd, to the children, to the vulnerable. And then go study a pig or cow. They said the same thing, which was really mind-blowing to me. They said we need our own food. If we're to be healthy, we need our land, we need to be able to hunt and to gather and to get our food. So for them, that's lesson number one. They're not going to get healthy regardless of how many hospitals are built, how many health services are provided, how many nurses are going to take care of them. If they can't access the most basic part of their world, which is the animal world, they're not going to be well. And trust me, the food that the government sends to them is practically toxic. They killed 50 million buffalo to subdue Sioux. They also burned all of our cornfields. So taking away our subsistence was part of altering and subduing and subjugating. And they did it here, but colonialism enacted the same strategy all over the world. Even today, you see it playing out in the media all over the world. What do? You attack their subsistence. That's their identity. We're Indigenous people. So a lot of anthropologists talk about the advocacy. And I did write an article, published it under the same name as this talk. And I kind of took issue with it. So anthropogenic climate change is intensified the repetition of environmental change inflicted on Indigenous people. So they're all talking at the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I read all their documents, I go to their meetings. They're all talking about, oh, Indigenous people, they're going to be flooded out, climate change is going to completely dispossess them. Heat, so on, they're the most vulnerable. This is true. However, it also claims that the reason we're dealing with the climate issues, which are really not even change anymore, it's really climate crisis, we're already there. We've already passed that marker, the red line. It's not the first time human beings in our version of history have done things against natural law that have created their demise. If you're Hopi, you believe this has happened 3 times before, but we survived each one because we didn't lose sight of what was important. Another one is Indigenous people did not create this disaster. They did not pollute the waters. They did not destroy the forests. They didn't do the damage, and they still aren't doing the damage. Yes, some are. They're fully simulated successfully, and we have a few mini Trumps running around, but generally they're the minority, and they're usually held in check pretty solidly by the community. So just saying we did not create this disaster, but now that they try to erase Indigenous people, they're coming back and saying, can you help us fix it? And we're like, it's a little late. So either you get all on board, because tokenizing days are over. We really need to take a full violent words, which is happening actually, and in some places. So we have these epistemologies and identities, our land-based practices, our culture, our language, all of it together weaves the fibers of Indigenous knowledge. In other words, you can't possess Indigenous knowledge if you only speak English. I can theorize in a classroom about it, but my daughter who went to immersion, in fact, all my daughters and son possess it because they were trained in the language. They can speak the language, they understand. So if you say woman in English, and I do this exercise with my students, I ask them to write down all the positive connotations they can think of about woman. And they come up with 4. Usually they're not correct, they're not really connotations. And then they come up with about 40 of negative connotations for the word woman, woman driver, everything you can think of. That gets worse and worse and worse until they're red in the face. And I'm like, okay, all I'm trying to show you is by me trying to talk to you about how Haudenosaunee believe women are endowed with a certain power that men do not have, or matrilineal, or not more powerful than them. We're just endowed with a different reason and a different thought process as we give life. So they respect that, and we're leaders in our community. But when you say woman in English, you can't immediately help people understand how universally powerful it is when you say it in our language. You lose that value associated with the language. So all of these things together create Indigenous knowledge. It's not, if you have language doesn't mean you automatically have Indigenous knowledge. That's not true either. You have to have all of the ingredients. As one elder, Hubert Buck, said to me, you need everything to make an engine go in a car. Culture is the same way. Health is the same way. You need all of it in order to run smoothly. And I'm happy to make sense. I think I get it now. So our ways of knowing It's really about how these things interconnect, and how Indigenous people are taught and pass knowledge from generation to generation. So even though we might not practice the way that our great grandmother did, we still possess a lot of the values and understanding. For example, if you look at Six Nations from a satellite, you can pick us out because you see all the trees. Yes, we live in houses. Yes, some of us even drive Escalades. You know, they aren't like, oh, I'm an environmentalist, I'm gonna get a Tesla, but we don't believe Teslas are environmental because they destroy rainforest to get an engine, but that's a whole nother conversation. We understand the damage we're doing, but if we can try not to destroy the Carolinian forest to build our houses, like I'm doing right now, like he had to shift it sideways, because I'm like, I'm not taking those trees down. Like, no, like they were here before me. Take the poplar because they're invasive species, but everything else stays. And he wasn't shocked because he built a house on the surface, and he's like, yeah, you guys are crazy. Like, they'll just spin your house right around. But those are the kinds of residual values that our people do have. Now, what was shocking to me was when I traveled the world, whether I was in Africa, I went to South Africa and stayed with some of the Swahili and different tribes around the world, whether it was Maori in New Zealand, Aboriginal Australia, we all have the same worldview. And as a young student, I was really like, wow, like they believe the same things we do, like culturally different, but they have the same principles, values, and understanding of the world and the universe and their place in it as we do. And I thought, why aren't scientists investigating that? That is a finding. It's something you find reliable, it's valid, I mean, all the measurements of science, but that question's never raised, or at least never sought. So that's when I started really looking at, well, what are those natural laws we really look at, and what is the scientific community not asking and not studying, and helping me to understand that it's not just about cultural values and perspectives, it really is about a foundation of knowledge and thought that has stood the testimony of time. And there's nothing as a Haudenosaunee woman I have to change in the Great Law or in any of our ancient stories to make it fit today. Women had power, children had power, children had agency. Women were the life givers. Men had other great talents. They had to be great orators. They had to be able to communicate and build consensus. We were a non-voting society. All the things that the West is now saying is human rights, we had that 1,000 years ago. So if you look at what was happening elsewhere, particularly in Europe 1,000 years ago, it wasn't quite that way. So ensuring that we have water was always brought up in all of these stories. Water is the first medicine. Water is everything. Water is a sentient being. It's female. Its energy is female. So looking at the way our people understood what is the most important element to our laws, it was always back to water. And when I was reading a lot of anthropology work, it was always the men and big game. You know, so you could tell where the focus was. Their interest was in hunting big game. So that's what they wrote about and said was most important to the creator, but if you talk to the Cree, they'll actually tell you that the moose is really important, but so is all the things that the women create. And they can't eat the moose unless the woman is there to help them. So getting the moose is only half the battle. Procuring the moose, creating the clothes, creating the dried meat, and so on and so forth. It requires everybody. So it's really nice balanced gender in that way, where people kind of looked at it as either patriarchal or matriarchal, and it really didn't work that way. How that influences climate change, in our view, is, as the Economic Department of Social Affairs points out, is that we have ways of taking Indigenous knowledge and mitigating climate change. That these are proven. So the Intergovernmental Panel, it goes to 145 countries. 50 scientists, they just looked at data, they didn't talk to anybody, they're just scientists. What was the data telling them? The data was telling them that Indigenous people are stewards of 84% of the world's biodiversity. So just think about that for 1 minute. Indigenous people are only 6% of the planet's population. But somehow, we manage and procure 84% of all of life's biodiversity, including aquatic life, the water. So that stunned them. When they said the best pieces of land, the most healthiest pieces of land, is where Indigenous people, this is important, manage and control their land or their water. We do not in Canada. I don't manage the Grand River. I'd love to take down every dam that is serving absolutely no purpose and killing our river, but I don't. I'm gonna have to go to court. I'm gonna spend years mitigating this process just to get them to do what they should have done 50 years ago when they didn't need the dam. So we don't manage and control our natural resources in Canada. So I need to make that very clear. On the reserve, yes. Anywhere else, no. And even on the reserve, it can be changed. So while they found this out, they also realized by 2021 IPCC report, when they went and looked at it a little bit more seriously and said, well, what is it about Indigenous people managing their land and having such good results? And then they measured it against conservation agencies, or Wildlife Foundation, etc., who get millions of funding. What they found out is they get no funding. They're not working with any conservation groups, and they're managing the land and making decisions that are not capitalistic in nature about subsistence economy. So there's a lot there. And how does this relate to then putting all of that information into a research project? I'm not going to go over this, but just to give you an idea, is Indigenous knowledge as complex as like doing this work is 10 times the load of my colleagues. I mean, they pick up the phone, they email done. I gotta go knock on doors, I gotta go pick up elders, I gotta go chase youth around who are supposed to be working for me as training and capacity development. I mean, we gotta manage a lot. In fact, we have over 182 collaborators in this model. But that is the community designing it from the ground up. They said mental health. And the engineers on my team were like, okay, no, Dr. Lost people. I'm like, I'll get another grant. So I got another grant, mental health. Let's look at it. I just listened to the elders in the community, not just elders, but local healthcare providers, frontline workers, and then water treatment guys who have been doing this for 30 years. To me, we're the premier experts on our water because they test it every single day. They look after it. So it's local knowledge, and it's also traditional knowledge holders, and it's Indigenous academics working with teams here, and then I go out and I recruit, you know, the engineer, the biologist, or so forth to be on the team, and the brave ones come forward, and most of them happen to be women, which I aspire to picture. Not all of them, but many. I'd say 80% of all these teams are female for some reason. So all of these teams have leads like Christine Moffett from anthropology. We have water governance, Nancy. We have engineering, testing heavy metals that the elders wanted. And everybody said, why heavy metals? We argued with them. The literature says farming, phosphorus. And they're like, no, heavy metals. And of course they were right. Found a lot of heavy metals, carcinogen and other things. They wanted climate change and flood mapping. So they had to work with community organizations or community knowledge holders or a school, Kayanní, the STEM school, to do the GIS mapping, but they had a team that was a partner in the community. And unfortunately, when I started the project, we had an environment office and we had Fish and Wildlife. These were the two main people that I relied on. One retired, one got sick and retired. And I had to literally create these entities out of the air so that these engineers and biologists had their partner. And that one almost killed me. I almost gave up. But today we do have a fish and wildlife officer. That's great. We still don't have an environment office, which is not great. And then we have two governments. We have the elected council, who I have to work with because they're in charge of like a lot. And then I have to go to the Confederacy Council. So I took my whole research team on a Saturday morning, sat them in a longhouse and said, we have to say who we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and that's it. Hopefully they like us. And of course we did. But the guys are scared. It was really interesting when the dynamics are changed. And we're always in Western environments like right now. But when I'm in my community, I'm not the same person. In fact, when people see me here, they're like, I don't even recognize you. And I'm like, yeah, it's shape shifting between being a Western orator, communicator, to then being in my own community, which is a very different tone and a very terrified tone in many ways. So we have to manage all of this. This is just one team. And then created all these councils. If they didn't exist, we created them. So the Confederacy, for example, put together a water committee because they were tired of Makasha and me going there and asking, bugging them all the time. They're like, just get a committee, go to them, get your letters of support or whatever. They also didn't want to hear who was funding what part of this project. They just renamed it Onignos. So we don't care. We just know it's you, it's Mac, and we trust it because you've got elders and so forth. So it's Onignos to us. So that I said, I still need you to write a letter for the ethics at MAC, or they're not gonna give you the money. That's a whole nother, that needs a full-time staff person, just the ethics, because I needed turtle, tagging ethics, I needed 3 committees, social sciences, and then health sciences for the health study. Full-time ethics officer would help. So these are again, another team, different partners, some of them are the same. But this is how it's organized. So anybody who thinks Indigenous knowledge isn't complex is wrong. It's not sitting around chatting with elders. I mean, I wish it was, but it's not. So what did we find? Well, Rahini, who is a doctor or PhD, studied the history of the Grand River, and she was basically confirming what the elders had said all along. These were the heavy toxins, contaminants, PCBs, and carcinogens in our water. Now remember, the Grand River is Six Nations source water. There's some things you can't clean up, but they do a really good job. So I'm not going to go over all of it. I'm just saying, you know, we do different types of research within an Indigenous knowledge framework. But it's led by a community, and that's a fundamental difference. And then we found out there's some real gender issues with lack of access to water. One thing I didn't think about was the violence. And I started reading UN stuff about Africa and other places. And I'm like, I wonder if we experience more violence because we don't have access to clean water. And sure enough, when we started inquiring, doing the research, we found in fact, it may be one of the highest reasons we have the kinds of violence towards Indigenous women in particular. I didn't put it in here, but I do have a map that a student did for me, and we mapped out all the pipelines in Canada from one end to the other, and then we overlaid it with all the hotspots for missing and murdered women. What do you think happened? Perfect match. So that was a whole other presentation, but just say gender issues just have really come to the surface around this. So we hired a drone and we looked at the Grand River. And what we realized, there's actually a few of these types of situations where like, okay, that doesn't look good. That's coming from Guelph. But if you go all up down Grand River, we're getting all of it. And then what they did was Six Nations. So this is their drinking water. Here we are over here. They dredged it super deep. So we have the deepest part of the Grand River along Six Nations borders. Then we have a dam in Caledonia and Brantford. Where do you think the dirtiest water is? Six Nations. So I went to Grand River Conservation Authority and said, can I see your data from your sensors? Like, so I wanted to compare Six Nations to, let's say, you know, Cayuga, whatever. Oh no, we don't have sensors along Grand River. Really? Why not? So environmental racism is to me a conscious choice. They are enacting certain things in a certain way so that you don't have data. And then when we look at how does this in fact affect the biodiversity, you can see where we are not in that 80%. Even though this is our bush, we have a big bush, we lost a lot of our species, right? Because we're an island of trees and bush around like Caledonia, Bradford and Cayuga, like we're surrounded. And we only have 5% of our original land. So that's a big one because hunting and so forth for food has really changed. We also looked at how many homes actually had access to the water, treatment plant water, and it was 89%. I think it might have moved up a little bit, a few more homes got it. And then this is just a small list, not even a complete list of what Rohini found is in our water, based on what was dumped. At a time, in fact, when Agent Orange was being produced by a Myra plant, they were dumping freely because there were no rules at that time. The rules didn't kick in until the 70s, and then 80s, they started getting really a lot better. So what we started realizing is, and the elders wanted to see, how are the fish doing? How are we doing? How are the turtles doing? How are we doing? So the plan was to test hair. Actually, they wanted to test breast milk. They wanted to test the amniotic fluid, and then COVID hit. So we had to take that apart and to say another time, it's not the right time. But that was their plan. And of course, the biologists and the health folks from MAC wanted to pursue that. So what does Canada look like largely? How are we surrounded? This is actually a little bit worse now because he just released the new one, but I didn't want to put it in there because it's really depressing. It's actually Canada warming at 3 times the rate of the rest of the world. Because of the tar sands. So I don't know if Canada knows it, but a lot of the world hates Canada because we are the #1 reason that the ice sheets are melting because of the tar sands. And I spent 30 years with the loop concrete who have been dealing with human impact, health-wise and other of those tar sands. So you can imagine cancer is very high. Respiratory, it's horrific. They did not have cancer prior to 1980, and now they have children. We don't have data because of COVID. We have to pull that survey out, but I know for a fact every household, children are on the respirators. So, anyways, we are kind of bad guys, although I don't think Canadians realize that. What is it going to cost? He does a breakdown. So you can go to the Global Water Futures website and look at how he's pulled all of it together as the director. But he's also noted that in every case, Indigenous people are in the hardest hit places. So like Six Nations is the dump for everybody upstream and has the worst water quality. What diseases would come with that? We wanted to look into that. The other thing is how the future is looking, and again, these are things that why we have a mental health team, because I could not go back to Six Nations and give them this data. I'm not gonna exasperate where we already have a high suicide rate. We already have a high sense of hopelessness. So I had to create an entire team, an app, a virtual reality, and we're just in the last phase of our gaming component with Mohawk College to disseminate this. To empower them so that if they make better choices, they'll have a better outcome. That's also on our website. So this is very scary, but it's very real. It is what's happening. So is health services ready for it? We don't think so. We don't think they're paying attention. They don't recognize the kinds of diseases that are going to emerge. You're going to have algae blooms. You're going to have heat strokes, and so on and so forth. We did do a study specifically at Six Nations, again, on our website. You can read up on it more. But what we found is what we're experiencing right now. It's nice outside. It's not supposed to be this nice outside. And it's gonna stay nice for most of this winter. So you're gonna have a decline in cold days, meaning a decline in snow, which is gonna lead to droughts. Right? It's just a destabilization. You're gonna have an unstable weather pattern. So what we did is we translated all this to the community and we took it to the farmers. And we said, you gotta adjust your farming practices for this new reality. And start thinking about how we're gonna mitigate that so we can have food security in our community. So, oh, I didn't even know this was in there. It's not in there. Okay, so for Hamilton is in the same boat. So again, this is just a sample of what they seem to not recognize in health services. I've been trying to get CIHR to focus on climate change for, I don't know, 8 years. I've kind of given up. They'll dabble in it, but they really just feel like, okay, that's insured. We're over here, you know. And so Indigenous people are insured, sure, and CIHR all together, right? That's how we would operate. That's how I have to operate as a researcher. So we're going to have these trends, and there's going to be unstable weather patterns, meaning floods and then droughts. That really affects. This is a Patricia Frazier's study of our Mackenzie Creek, and what it shows is there's going to be flooding. There are people building homes right there. So we wanted to take that to the council and to housing and say, how would be good if they don't build a house there? Because it's highly likely it's going to flood, and then they're going to be out. So again, just being able to create some planning. We also wanted to focus on women and maternal health because of the elders. That's what they said. Women carry baby in water. It's deep foundational teaching in our culture that your first environment is water. Water protects you, so women protect water. It's a reciprocal relationship. So of course we needed to go to the birthing center, and then we asked them to develop the design of the survey. And we said, you know, we knew at least 6 different researchers just from that alone have been doing research there. And I said, can you, to my PhD student, is there anywhere in that research where they asked if women have access to clean water during their home birth or hospital birth or C-section, anything? Is there one question in all that data that was collected with all that money, all that time and energy? Is there one question? Because I want, you know, to use it as a marker, not one. But the midwives go, but we did. We noted it in our notes. So I said, great. I don't want it to be invasive. Do you want to do a survey, your own evaluation on your notes, and then come back and then develop the survey? And that's what we did. So working with community, and what we found, of course, something that shocked us with anxiety and depression were linked to them not having access to clean water. That was the highest. We were thinking skin diseases, gastro, other things. It was always coming back to mental health. So Afroza needed to finish her PhD. So the midwives said, you know what, you can't come in the community, we're in COVID lockdown, we'll do the interviews. We'll take this on so that you can graduate on time. So when you build those relationships with the community, they will go that extra mile for you if they know you're listening to them in a real way. They actually helped the water study too. I think Lori collected more water than the master's and PhD students at MAC who were trying desperately to collect water, get tap samples, and of course people wouldn't show up and answer the door, and they were getting mad, and I'm like, welcome to my world. They did it, and they collected 3 times the amount of samples in a couple of months than the whole year before. So COVID really showed us how community can step up. One of the things we did push back on was the HY study. And the reason we wanted to include that in the health survey with Six Nations Health Services is because it's not been applied. It's a universal measurement that has been developed for non G7 countries, but it's never been applied here, and I was like, why not? Like, we're more like, those countries than we are our neighbors in Caledonia, because they have water, we don't. So we did it, and now we're in the phase of comparing this data with the data from Kenya and India. And just at first glance, it's pretty at par. So again, looking at the environment and what we have or don't have, is helping inform and shape the questions you ask, who you get as a partner, and how you establish a community-based research project. It's complicated and it's difficult, but they are highly concerned about water. So when we went to the international water conference at the UN, this is where I took a picture from. This is what the world has, fresh water, right now. That's it, right there. And that's it. The planet has 6 billion people right now. A quarter of them are water insecure. By 2050, the projections are much worse. So protecting water, or as we say, we have water protectors, we have people putting their bodies on the front lines, including myself, including my children, whether it's Standing Rock, all the way back to Oka. I've been there, I've been doing that. Because we understand that it's not about what the media says it's about. It's like, if you do this, you're taking away the only place that will have access to medicines, food, and water. So we're constantly putting our bodies on the line, and my thinking is we shouldn't have to be. We need to get Canadians and Americans to understand this is you too. You are going to be in the same boat. If you go to Detroit, if you go to some of the places in the States, you'll know that they're already dealing with it, and so will Canada. So the more we get ahead of this, the better. And again, women are at the forefront of that. So I'll leave you with focusing on traditional knowledge is mitigating both climate change and Indigenous health and well-being. It should be a social determinant of health. When I do studies and they want me to use these social determinants of employment, education level, like they're just so off the par of what really matters in the Indigenous community. What really matters is, I'm going to ask a Bubakhan woman who can hunt, who can procure that meat, who can sew that jacket for her kids, who can speak her language. I'm going to put her down as before. Are you kidding? I'm jealous of her. I would take what she knows in a heartbeat over what I know, because she has her knowledge, she has her land. She's higher on the scorecard in our world, not lower. But if we were coming in under the social determinants of health, you would be putting her as impoverished, uneducated, etc. So these are the things that are really problematic, and why we keep not hitting change in the way that we should be. So we need to promote dialogue. We need to be able to create experts across all these fields so that we're able to consciously talk about the way a meteorologist is going to inform us what's coming. They're important to our study as much as the clinical psychologist is, as much as the technician is who's developing our dissemination of our results in VR. So enabling a keystone species to manage our lands, when we say land back, that's what we're talking about. If you really want to mitigate your future, Canada's future, have Indigenous people manage land. Shouldn't be a scary thing, because it's proven now worldwide they're doing it better, they're doing it with less money, and they're doing it more effectively at par or even better than multi-million-dollar industries of conservation. Those are all facts in the IPCC report. Also, to help aid health researchers that understand the ecosystem is part of our health. You're not going to get better, you're not going to get healthier if you chronically don't have access to clean water, if you chronically don't have access to your traditional foods. The things that would help our people are not often prescribed or understood by those that are servicing our communities. The backside of this is we need a waste treatment plant. Six Nations, even if we piped in all the water tomorrow, We don't have a waste treatment. Most communities, you build a water treatment plant to get a waste treatment plant, but not if you're Indigenous. So we can do these things in the future more restorative, more sustainable, more effective, and the model by Johansson is now retired, but you can't tell that that's a waste treatment plant, can you? And those are the things that we can contribute to being able to do things in a more sustainable, healthier way. So research led by Indigenous people requires holistic integration of all the sciences I would just say, that would both restore our health and our environment. And that's kind of what I put together to develop a health institute at Six Nations, which I'm like inching closer and closer to security, because I just can't operate from this place. It's not healthy for me, it's exasperating. It's much easier if I just build up my community so that we can be equal partners to our colleagues at universities, and we can contribute both ways. But right now, universities, these agencies have all the money, all the power, and all the authority, and our communities are basically left out of that. And our goal is to create more equity in knowledge production. So that is it. If you're interested in any of these things, you can pursue them. All our publications. We have 30 digital stories. We have 30 Let's Talk Water podcasts that deal with everything from sterilization to land back. We have scientists, elders, engineers, everybody on there. So we also have this community that's made, including my students here at MAC, I think over 40 digital stories about water, and we have art projects with kids in the community who have developed really beautiful pieces of art for us, our VR, and as well as our terror stories mapping our world back to health. So all of those things can be found, and they're there for tools for teachers, for educators, for researchers. They're free, open access. And I just got a call from the new child in BC who are going to be adopting some of these methodologies, like the terror story, because it's where our plants and where we need to restore certain areas are more important than others. So they really like the app that we designed with Rudo Kemper. And our kids at Kayanní and STEM, that our high school kids are doing the geospatial mapping. They're mapping the language of the trees. They're doing water testing. They're amazing. So part of IK is always training and capacity development. It's just a given. You have to train the locals, whether they're students or not students. And that's another funding problem we have, because Mac's like, you're hiring high school students, like we don't do that. And I'm like, well, I did, because they're going to be our future managers. Right, so those are the kinds of things that IK builds right into there across the board, regardless of what you're looking at. Training, capacity building, language are all part of that. So thank you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you come back to learn more about Indigenous health and our ways of being.